I'm Erik Quigley. I'm a creative director out of Sarasota, Florida, and I run an agency called Uncommon Crowd. This is about creative contracts. I'm not a lawyer. I'm only sharing this information as something from what I've learned. I'm working with my own attorney and then working with clients. You should always, 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 and I'm going to say this several times, you need to consult a licensed attorney anytime you're dealing with contracts. You can only go so far on your own, and to have that proper protection, you have got to go to a lawyer. So I used to create my own, and there are several resources you can get online. AIGA is one that I did build, contracts for. I just ran into an issue where they weren't really able to be held up in court. I had issues where I ran into, a problem with a client, and I realized I couldn't actually get anything out of what I had created for myself. So they were great in theory, right? But when it came down to actually being able to enforce them legally, it wasn't something that I could actually do. All of mine were created by an attorney. That said, I want to start with the top 5 contracts I recommend to have for your agency, for your business, really creative in any capacity. Number 1 is a master agreement. So this is I call it the Mac Daddy. This is the contract that's going to have every single thing in it that will pertain to a single project. In my case, I run a branding agency. So this is going to cover everything for that branding process. The master agreement is like that big, long thing, that has everything included. And then there's a scope of work that's attached to that details all of the pieces of the project that are going to happen. So the master agreement will stay the same all the time. You don't have to change that. The scope of work is what's going to change based on the project. So that's the number 1 main thing that I use. The second one that I have, it's a retainer agreement. I also use it similarly for my web maintenance. They allow for me to have people on monthly. In the contract, it details specific deliverables, that it's, month to month, that they have so many hours every month that they can work within to do that kind of thing. So that's your retainer agreement or web maintenance agreement. I use the same one for 2 different functions. Another contract that you'll want to have or should have is a mutual NDA. This is something that you're not going to use it with clients because you should always have a mutual NDA or confidentiality portion of your contracts for your clients. This is specifically if you're working with other contractors, you're creating partnerships, just so that you both are kind of bound to not speaking about the intricacies of what's going on within that partnership or agreement or project or whatever. So mutual NDA, you're only going to use that, again, specifically for people that are partners or contractors. Another one that I recommend having is a notice of default. You're going to use this for clients that are not paying you. So this is an official document that's saying, hey, you're late. Until I receive payment on this, we're not going to do any work. And the last one, which isn't really a contract at all, it's just a notice of completion. And I instituted this because so many times as creatives, we get into these projects with people and they want it to keep going. There's scope creep and there's, I don't want to let go and I want you to hold my hand, and we have these little tiny things to do. This notice of completion says to them, it gets them to sign off and saying, I'm approving all the work that was done. This project is completed. And then anything moving forward is going to be considered a new project, right? So that you have a specific defined endpoint. Those are the top 5 contracts that I would recommend, freelancers or agencies, all of them to have to run their business. So the master agreement with the scope of work, the retainer or web maintenance agreement, a mutual NDA, a notice of default, and a notice of completion. Next, I want to talk about the parts of a contract. We're going to specifically go through each one. Number 1, huge, is ownership of the final work. This is like the number 1 thing that should be in really any creative contract. Your ownership is going to say who owns the work when everything's completed. And once again, I know you can read this on here. I'm not an attorney. Anything that you are including in your contracts, please, please, please have it looked at by an attorney. So ownership rights are going to indicate whether the client owns everything when everything's done. Generally, it's called a work for hire, where when you're finished, they get all the rights to everything. Here you go, your responsibility. I have no, I don't have any rights, recurring rights to those. The other option is a licensing type of agreement where you own the rights to everything and that client is going to continue to license things out year over year. Next thing is limited use clause. So that's allowing you, regardless of the ownership of the final work, it's allowing you to actually use the work when it's done for your portfolio, for your website, to get more clients, because that's always a thing, right? We want to be able to use the work that we have to bring in new work, bring in new clients, showcase ourselves. Ownership of final work is going to indicate who owns what when you're done, but the limited use is going to allow you to retain that limited use of the work to bring in more clients. Piggybacking off of that, property rights, whenever you're doing a project, generally designers, I don't know how it works with marketers, I guess campaigns and things. When you're doing projects for clients, you have work that they don't choose, right? Like you give them a bunch of options and they don't choose several things. This property rights clause allows you to retain all of those ideas that they didn't pick. They'll own all of the stuff you created during this period. They own the one thing that they decided to move forward on. So all of the other ideas remain yours. They're your intellectual property. And you can use those for another client or maybe revamp something to work for somebody else if it happens to fit. So property rights allow you to keep all of the iterations that they did not choose. Another thing which is really big, and people kind of give me a little pushback on this, is a delay fee. I started putting this in my contracts because how many times have you done a project where the client pushes things off, right? Like they get to a certain point and they get really busy, or they forget, or you're waiting on things or whatever, and things just go on and on and on. And for creatives, it's a really big problem because you get backed up then, right? Like you have a client that's waiting and waiting and waiting, then they want to get started as soon as you get all these other people involved, right? So then it backs you up. Adding a delay fee allows you to charge them for any time that they've gone over. What I will do is set a specific, so I have a start and an end date for every project. Again, I'm in branding, so my projects are a little longer. And then putting in the delay fee that 7 days passed or 2 weeks passed or whatever, that's when the delay fee will start to be implemented. And then you're charging a percentage of whatever is left of the contract. Generally, it's probably towards the end. So, it's like 25% of whatever's remaining. This just allows you to fall back and say, hey, remember we did this thing and now we've pushed this too far and I need this to keep going. It's a big thing that's going to keep them on timeline with you because they don't want to pay for that. Very few times have I actually had to implement this. It's more just saying to the client, hey, so you need to be in this with me. So delay fees are huge. The next one that's really, really big are including a standard number of revisions. Standard number of revisions in your contracts are like a saving grace when it comes to working with any sort of client, because they will, run you into revision jail that you will not be able to get out of it because they want to change things and work through stuff. Putting in a standard number of revisions and then anything after that, that's when they're going to start to get charged. I usually use 2. I put 2 in there and say, after 2, you're going to have to, you're going to start to be charged that. Following that, changes to scope. That's another big section to put in contracts where anything beyond the originally agreed on proposal or the type of work that you originally agreed on, this is going to force a change order. It's going to say anything beyond with, whatever we already agreed on, you're going to have to pay for, because we can't keep lumping it in, right? So a changes to scope clause is super important. Cancellation clause is another one that's really good, just to make sure that people know, okay, we understand what has to happen if you're going to cancel, and this is how much you're going to owe me. It's similar to a kill fee, right? So it's going to say, this is how much you owe me for whenever whenever you decide to cancel on me. Because at the end of the day, if somebody is canceling, you are losing money. You're losing money you depended on, right? Like you're not a major corporation. You're not, a company that just has millions of dollars sitting in the bank. You can afford to lose that, right? So cancellation, it tells them, okay, you have a certain amount of time, it needs to be done in writing, and this is the amount of money you're going to owe me if you do cancel. The fee, if they try to cancel, should be a flat fee or percentage based on the remaining scope. From my perspective and from the experiences that I have, you can do either. I have done both. It's all what you're comfortable with. Again, speak to an attorney, talk to a licensed professional on this. But I would say whatever you're comfortable with based on whatever the project is. Maybe if they're smaller projects, it makes more sense to go, okay, you're going to owe me $200 or $300, right? Like that's what the fee is going to be, because a percentage would be so minor that they're not going to care. It's really about the psychology of what's going to keep them from canceling, or what's going to, allow them to really understand that you mean business, right? Like they can't just walk all over you. So I think if the project is smaller, it's more of a flat fee where it's like, or the percentage goes higher. And then with larger projects, you're talking $20,000, $30,000 projects, then you want to talk about a percentage of whatever's left. Another one that gets a little bit of flack from people is a confidentiality agreement in your main contracts. The confidentiality agreement is going to keep mutual confidentiality, them and you, from discussing anything associated with the project. This does 2 things. It keeps your process safe. Keeping your process kind of under wraps allows you to remain flexible in the process that you have. It changes all the time. My process changes all the time. So where somebody before may have had 8 steps. I now only do 6. It just allows for things to change, changing. The same way with pricing. It keeps your pricing under wraps because I do value-based pricing. Mom and pop is not going to get charged the same that Walmart would for the exact same type of work because the value is different for them. The value is, they're bringing in less money, but the value to how many people they're bringing in and how many people they're, customers they're approaching and appealing to, it's going to change. So the confidentiality agreement keeps your process and your pricing under wraps so that you don't have clients talking to one another or reaching out to other ones that work with you, right? If you're putting your work up on your website, there's a likelihood somebody could reach out to another company and go, hey, how much did this cost you? So having that there, you're not going to be able to keep everybody from talking about everything, but just having it there is enough to, just really help them put that in their brain to say, hey, this really isn't my business to be talking about this. I've done projects too where, I wanted to do it as a favor because I felt really connected to the client, or it was a specialty case or a charity kind of thing or whatever. And I don't want that information out among, other people because they can use that as leverage then, right? They can say, well, you only charge this for them. How come you're charging this to me? It just makes things messy. So confidentiality agreement in your contracts is massive. And the very last thing that I include all the time is a trademark responsibilities clause. This clause is I know we're getting into really boring stuff right here, but it's super important because how many times have you created a logo? How many times have you created a brand name, done anything that needs to be trademarked? And then you do a cursory search, right? That's only so far. Clients have to have the legalities handled behind all their trademarking. So this trademarking clause just keeps you in the clear and it keeps you from having to deal with that. My top 10, just to reiterate, are making sure you're including ownership of the final work, making sure you're putting in a limited use clause, a relationship clause, indicating property rights, putting in a delay fee, putting in a standard number of revisions, putting in any changes to scope, a cancellation clause, a confidentiality clause, and trademarking responsibility. Those are my top 10 for now. Next piece I want to talk about is working with clients with these, right? It's great if you have a contract, but the problem is, okay, well, we're creatives. We don't have thousands and thousands of dollars to, number one, hire an attorney probably, number two, to actually litigate anything. Working with clients is a huge thing on when you have contracts like that, right? It's you can't just say, here's your contract, set it, forget it, you understand everything. That's where you run into problems later. When you have a contract, number one thing that I'm going to recommend that you do is set up a meeting to go through the contract high points. You have a welcome meeting, you have an onboarding meeting, make this part of it. Go through those super specific things in the contract to say, this is what a delay fee is. This is why it's there. This is what, the confidentiality is for. This is what I'll explain these things to the client so that they're, first of all, not thinking that you're just nitpicky and want to, be bowed down to it. It really helps to seal that bond, right? Because you're being transparent with them. But it also helps to get them 100% on board because a lot of times clients will hire us and they look at it as a point and clicker. When you're in that sort of a position, it's really difficult to get around that, right? Once clients see you as, a point and clicker and that you're just a doer for them, it's really hard to get out of that. So setting up this contract from the beginning saying, these are my boundaries, essentially. I need you to agree to these. This is why this is happening. Going through it with them is super, super important. So that's the number one thing that I'm always going to recommend is if you have a contract and you're trying to enforce it with a client, go through it at the beginning. It gives you something to lean on and reinforce when it actually happens, right? Which leads me to my next point. If it happens, if things happen, if you know you're going to run into a delay, if you know that you have scope creep happening, if you know these things are going on, implement them right away. Talk to your client about them right away. Make them aware. The worst thing you can do is wait. If you wait to tell a client something is going wrong, right, or that they're not following something that they agreed to, you're just going to have more problems down the road. You're never going to actually enforce it. Then you're not going to be able to because it's going to have, the time will have passed. So if something happens, then's the time to bring it up. It's not about being mean at all. It's about just saying, hey, this is what we agreed to. Can we talk about this and figure this out? Because I know this is going to happen and I don't want this to impact anything. Talk to your legal professional to be able to get a, specific thing. But I'm not a lawyer. Once again, I'm not a lawyer. But contracts to me are 90% psychology. If you are upfront with your clients, if you are transparent as possible, and then you're reinforcing that when they come up, the client is going to be more likely to stay in it with you, to see you as the expert. They're going to realize that you have boundaries, and then they're going to be able to stay on that timeline with you. It's really about, like I said, it's the psychology of it. 9 times out of 10, you're not going to have to enforce this. And a lot of times we don't have the funds to actually be able to enforce it, right? So leaning on that psychology is a huge, huge part of it. What happens then, right, if clients don't want to sign your contract? That's the thing that happens too, right? I think it scares a lot of creatives because we're going, I have all these things in place and I really need to work. And what happens if they don't want to sign it? You need to get comfortable with not chasing every client. You need to get really comfortable with saying no. Get really comfortable with going, you know what? This isn't the right fit. That's the first thing, period. Regardless of contract or not contract, you need to get comfortable with going, this isn't my tribe. This isn't the person I want to work with. They don't respect me as the creative that I am or the expert that I am. So I need to step away from this. That's number one, if they don't want to sign a contract. Number two, if they don't agree to terms, have the conversation with them. Bring your attorney in, figure out what's going to work, because having contracts in place allows you to enforce or not enforce. It gives you the option instead of being tied to something or not having the protection you need. So this allows you to be like, I like this client. I work really well with this client and I have 2 revisions in my contract, but I'm okay to give them 3 without charging them. Having a contract in place allows you to bend the rules rather than be beholden to them, which also makes you look really good if you bend something for somebody or, communicate. So if they don't want to sign or have hesitancy signing and they have certain things in the contract that they want you to update or adjust, that should be a conversation you have with them. It's not just an automatic, no, I'm not going to work with you because you won't sign my contract. No, it's about the certain things that, you have those conversations and go, okay, how does this work for both of us? And 9 times out of 10, again, having the conversation is really what makes it. And most of the time they will agree to it. I've had plenty of times where clients have gone, hey, this feels one-sided or this feels this way. And I'm like, okay, well, talk to me about whatever it is and we can adjust that. And a lot of times it really doesn't bother me to adjust certain things. If they don't want to sign the contract and there's not anything specific and they just look at you like this is too much to even bother with, then at that point, I think it's time to say, okay, we don't need to do this. This isn't something that is really beneficial to me. You're not respecting what I have in place. You're not even willing to have a conversation about it. At that point, it just makes sense to say, okay, well, maybe this isn't the best fit because you don't want to sign. And that's okay. That's totally okay. You do not have to take on every single client. I know our brain is going, and I'm going to talk about imposter syndrome here in a minute, but I know our brains are going, where's this work coming from? I have to be able to pay my bills. I have to be able to do this, have to be able to do that. 80% of your headache comes from 20% of your clients every single time. Guarantee it. Guarantee it. And to the flip side, 80% of your income is coming from 20% of your clients every single time. The 80-20 rule, if you don't know it, please look it up. Will change your life. So if somebody doesn't want to sign a contract, first thing is to have a conversation with them and go, okay, well, what's really bothering you? What can we adjust? And the second thing would be if they really don't want to work with you on something, I think it's ideal that you would pass on the partnership. So, but again, it's totally up to you, totally up to how you want to run your business. And once again, I'm not a lawyer. Please do not take any of this as legal advice. You should be checking with an attorney on any of this information that I'm giving. And finally, I want to talk about what contracts really do subconsciously that we don't necessarily realize happens. All of us deal with imposter syndrome. We're comparing ourselves to other designers where, family members might be talking to us like, hey, when are you going to get a real job? There's plenty of things that we, as creatives, are very sensitive anyways. We work with our hearts. A lot of the work that we do is very much representative of ourselves. So when somebody wants to hire us, it's like them saying they like you. At least for me, it's very like, you like my work, so you like me, you accept me, you want to work with me, and it makes us feel really good, which makes it really, really difficult to price anything, makes it really difficult to say no. But what contracts do, if you don't have it in place or you don't feel like you have a good one, contracts make you really confident. Contracts make you feel like you know what you're talking about, even if you know what you're talking about before. But contracts make you go, okay, I have something to stand on. I'm really confident in what this contract says, and I know what it means. So it relieves a lot of that imposter syndrome. It's going, okay, I have a plan in place that nobody's going to catch me up on this because I know what's going on. So they have a huge knock-on effect, at least for me. Having a good contract and having the particulars in place that you can really enforce if you need to kind of eradicates imposter syndrome, at least for me. I am not a lawyer. I just fully believe in having very solid creative contracts. I feel like it's something creatives obviously lack in. A lot of us don't really know what we're doing in that area. Once again, I'm not an attorney. I have just worked with my attorney and, in working with clients to just kind of work on perfecting how I use clients or contracts in my client process. So my name is Erik Quigley. I'm a creative director out of Sarasota, Florida. I run an agency called Uncommon Crowd. I do offer mentoring for creatives. If you want, feel free to reach out. You can find me on LinkedIn at Erik Quigley, Quigley, or at Uncommon Crowd. You can also find me on TikTok at Uncommon Crowd, Instagram at TikTok Uncommon Crowd. I'm all over the place. So again, if you are not part of our creative community, please go to my profile, sign up. It's free. It's on Discord.